This episode is sponsored in part by PTZOptics. Why hire a camera operator when the control is in your hands? Visit PTZOptics.com for more information. And by NewTek, makers of the TriCaster TC1. Stun your viewers, not your accountant. Visit newtek.com for more information.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Salt Talk. I'm Julia Sherwin with PTZOptics, joined by Jeremy Kloosterman of Resi.io and Stephen Haywood with PTZOptics. Well, we're going to get right down into it because before you know it, the holidays will be here, and we wanted to provide you with 20 tips for bettering your house of worship live streams. So we're going to jump right into it. The first tip is test, test, and test. Let's see, Stephen, you want to take that one?
Sure. One of the things that I see a lot of houses of worship do, they implement new equipment right away, and they do it that Sunday morning. And don't take anything for granted. You want to test to ensure everything in your production is working, that you have everything set up adequately. Test your graphics, test your video, your audio, your switching, your destinations, your bandwidth. Run your speed test, things like that. Don't wait till the Sunday morning of. Get going and test it. Go in a couple days before. Test it with people there. Test it with people that aren't there. Have people watching the stream from home. Make sure that you can see what's going on and get that real-time feedback without waiting till D-Day, which is Sunday, Julia.
Yeah, makes sense. It's kind of like wearing your new basketball shoes for a big game. You don't want to do that, right? You want to practice in those shoes first. So
that's right.
These are excellent tips. How about the chat? Jeremy, you want to take us with your thoughts on the chat itself?
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because my pastor just sent me an article that he stumbled across about interactive video, and I'm thinking like a choose your own adventure sort of interactive book that I used to read like growing up, and I used to love those. But video has kind of taken that approach in some degree, like obviously video on demand would be that where you can like choose your route of how you want the video to turn out. But more than that, it was talking about interactive on the video platform. So chat is a huge part. You never want the door of your church to be open, somebody come, sit down, listen to the service, and then leave. You want people to interact with them. And it's the same online. When you view your online audience as church members who are coming and to engage and worship with you, you want to engage with them. You want to talk to them. You want to greet them and have a side chat where if needed they can submit personal or private prayer requests to like a pastoral leadership team. So chat is hugely important. Don't just put your message out there and expect, hey, people will figure it out, especially on Facebook. There's crazy conversations that happen there. So sometimes turning chat off on those platforms, if you're not actively monitoring them, is smart and wise to do. So
right. Well, that's really important. One of the crux of the whole reason for live streams is to continue to engage your remote audiences. You've got in-person audiences, you have remote audiences. So great tips there. Be real. This is tip number 3. Stephen, what would you say about that?
Well, your online video is the first thing people are going to see. A lot of times today, people look for their churches. They're looking online, and this is your one and only opportunity to make that first impression. And I always suggest to folks, don't be something you're not. I talk to pastors and I say, look, don't put yourself out there. Don't pretend to be someone you're not, where you're trying to uphold this professional persona when you're doing this video, when in reality you're a laid-back guy. A lot of people are looking for laid-back pastors. They're not looking for this uptight, unapproachable guy. And if you're not an uptight, unapproachable guy, don't pretend to be one. Be authentic. Be real. When people experience you online, you want that same experience in the house, and vice versa. People that see you in house, they want to know that hey, he's the same way online that he is in house. And I think that's really very important, especially when it comes to other ministries that you have at your church. You need to make sure that you're representing them well and you're not making them look and feel to be something that they're not. Everybody always says, oh, the camera makes things look so much bigger. In some cases, that's true. So, Julia, that's one of the things that I think I'd strongly recommend to houses of worship, to make sure they try to stay as authentic and real as possible.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think for any kind of, hosting capacity, it would be sort of unsustainable if you're going to go out there in a likeness that isn't authentic. So, I definitely hear that a lot. And this next tip sort of goes hand in hand with that. Tip number 4, know your audience. Jeremy?
Yeah. So, like Stephen alluded to in last comment, is our live streams have really become the new first impressions of the church, because it's so easy to jump online and check out a few churches on a Sunday morning that are live streaming and really see where you want to fit. But when you do that, like as the church congregation and church volunteers, you're not able to get to know them like you would if they were coming through the doors of the church. So we really try and get people to engage on chat, so we know who's out there. We ask, hey, where are you watching from, and try to get them to share a little bit about themselves so we can get to know them, because we want to keep it personal and we want to know where might they be in life, and try to get to know them that way. And we do that a little bit easier on our website. We kind of keep our website more as the church body, and then use Facebook and YouTube more as, my pastor always says, it's kind of like the billboard on the side of the highway that grabs people's attention as they're scrolling through social media, right? So that's kind of our approach to using social media, is that billboard approach, and then drive them and bring them to our website where it's more of a community feel.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One thing that my pastor always says at the top of each Mass each week, he says, all are welcome here. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, just simple words like that to let your audiences know, wherever they are in life, they're welcome. So now we're going to get into some of the more, technical aspects, which I know you've all been waiting for. Room mics. Stephen, this is sort of, as our broadcast engineer, I know audio is one of the things you work on among many others. So tell us a little bit about that, room mics.
Yeah, we always make the joke. A buddy of mine who was in the radio business for over 50 years, he always says audio is not important. And the reality is it's the most important. And that's why he says what he says, because oftentimes it's overlooked. And a lot of people, when they get going in a church, and they get going in their house of worship, they tend to overlook the audio. And I don't mean like the pastor's usually mic'd up, the instruments are mic'd up, but sometimes when the service is going on, you get that studio feel. If you guys kind of understand what I'm saying, you get that, like what we have right now. There's no ambient noise. It's just a studio feel. And a lot of times in houses of worship, the audience could be vocal. The pastor could be one of those speakers that request engagement, where he wants a lot of vocal, feedback from the audience. So how do you do that? Well, with room mics. You need to equip yourself with some room mics. You need to get yourself some ambient condenser microphones, and a lot of churches will hang them from the ceiling. Some put them off to the side. I've seen them put them in windowsills. I kind of would suggest hanging them from the ceiling. That would be my suggestion over different areas. And depending on how large your congregation is, you might need to, plan accordingly. But for most cases, you could probably get away with one on each side of your sanctuary setting. And you're not increasing the audio levels to where, it's overloading, right? The sanctuary, everything else. Or overloading the pastor. It's just enough to get that ambient noise. If somebody laughs, if somebody says, "Oh, awesome," or "Thank you," or whatever, Um, This is the type of thing that you definitely want to do, Julia. These are little things that separate a church where you can get engaged online to a church where you feel like you're sitting in a studio like we are right now and discussing topics. It just takes the air out of the room, if you will.
Makes sense. And real quick before we get to the next tip, why do you like hanging them from the ceiling?
So I like hanging them from the ceiling personally because they're out of the way. They're out of reach of small children, especially when you deal with folks that are in wheelchairs. I mean, sometimes you have special needs folks that are in there, and you have, like I said, folks in wheelchairs or walkers or canes. The less you can run wires on the ground, the better. It's safer. It's a safer environment. Where if you put it on the windowsill, sometimes people will run it on the floor because they don't want to see it running up the wall. So that's just you can call it a little bit of aesthetics, but mainly it's because of keeping wires and things off the floor. And it centers it over the congregation as opposed to just like, I would say directional if it's in a windowsill, depending on where it's located.
That makes sense.
Saves on the gaff tape, right, Stephen?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't want to. You don't want to be putting that stuff. You don't want to do that more than you have to do, because if you do that, it's just one other thing that could go wrong, right? As somebody rips a wire out, Julia. I mean, anything could happen. It's just, I don't like doing it. And you get the noise from a window depending on how old it is. If it's a stained glass window, those things leak air.
Well, I was just thinking leaking water. I mean, here we are.
That too.
We have another nor'easter here in this area of the country, and sadly, with all of these recent storms, places get flooded. So depending on the geography or the location of your house of worship, that's always a potential too.
I like this with the digital, the experience online. Lawrence calls them digital ushers. I like that. I think I'm going to coin that phrase. I'm going to use that.
That makes a lot of sense. So, how about pre-service? Wait, no, actually, I missed one. I missed tip number 6: email lists or forms to as a way to stay in touch with your congregation. How are you guys doing that?
Yeah, so we again for my church, we're using the Church Online platform, which is a great free platform. If you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. Church Online, I think it's churchonlineplatform.com or something like that. It's the same people who make the YouVersion Bible app, and they just give that platform away for free. So there's what they call moments that you're able to push out in chat. So if you want engagement, so at the beginning of service, we kind of push out a moment that is like, hey, if you're new here, click on this link, fill out a first time visitor card. We're gonna get you a free gift and everything. That's a page, and so we use that and use it very well. Another thing, especially now with smartphone technology and AI and everything, you can roll in QR codes into your live stream, and what happens then is, if they're watching on TV or computer, then just aim their phone at that at that QR code, and you can immediately pull up a form for getting people to engage that way. Because going back to know your audience, we want to know those first-time visitors, that they're there. We want to be able to reach out to them and send them materials about the church, or if they've made a decision to take a step further in their walk with the Lord, we want to give them books and materials to help them along their way. So we use a lot of forms that way, QR codes, and then moment links in that Church Online platform. That's a great use of a tool like that.
Yeah, everybody loves QR codes today, and we're using them more and more, and they're just becoming like sort of pervasive as far as information sharing today. So tip number 7, pre-service music. What are your thoughts on this, Stephen?
Well, I know we have a lot of houses of worship that maybe subscribe to Spotify, Apple Music, Google Music, all these different services that offer cloud-based music. So basically, you can pull it up for funerals and weddings and even pre-service. What people don't realize is that it can get you into a lot of trouble due to copyright. And when you get into places and you're streaming to free services like YouTube and Facebook, well, they have an algorithm that's built in. It's not managed by humans like us. It's managed by algorithms. And so therefore, it's looking for certain keywords. It's looking for certain sounds that it's been programmed with. So it grabs it and it could take your service offline. And, you know, a lot of times Facebook will put you in what they call Facebook jail, right? So sometimes it's 3 strikes and you're out. And other times it's the first one you're out for a week. The next one you might be off for 15 days, and the next one you might be 30 days. Really depends on how bad Facebook views the violation. Now, how can you stay away from that? What are some things that you can do to protect it, even with worship music? I'm going to take this opportunity to use this as a plug for our upcoming show with PTZOptics that's coming up on November the 4th. Tess Protesta will be leading a conversation with myself and a special guest about this very thing. So you definitely want to mark your calendars and tune in for that, as we're going to get into this legality side of music with live streams. And it's not just for houses of worship. This can be used for any kind of broadcast, and understanding what is legal and what is not, and how you can protect yourself as a house of worship. So Julia, that's how I'm going to defer that.
Yeah, very important. When I had worked for the radio station as a radio host, and we would often record segments and spots with, you know, some background music, there was we subscribed to royalty-free music. Do you have any favorite services that you like for that?
Well, with different music places like royaltyfreemusic.com, there's some other ones, you got to look at the licensing, because the licensing may say if you're monetizing off of this, you can't use it. But if you're just using it for, say, your own little live stream, you're doing a bumper, you're not monetizing anything, you have no advertisers, you have no sponsors, then you're free to use it. The second you start making money, they want their cut. So you really have to look at the terms of services for these sites. So I'm sure the one that you were using for the radio had it in their terms of service that you could use it for whatever monetization the radio did. But folks, you have to look at the terms of service. And like I said, we're going to get into that on that show coming up November 4th.
Very important. Thank you for the plug. As a content creator, you know, these are really important points to look at and to not ignore. So on to tip number 8. You want to make sure you don't skimp out on lighting. Tell us a little bit about lighting and what your thoughts are on that, Jeremy.
Yeah, for sure. So lighting obviously is key. And I had the privilege of being an LD, lighting director, at my previous church for a period of time. I learned a ton. And so a big thing in churches is even lighting, right? So if your pastor walks across stage a lot, he's walking in and out of potentially dark spaces as he's walking across. So that's called key lighting, and you want that as even as possible wherever your pastor walks, or have lights that you can bring up. Some will start out on a stage and maybe walk down the steps to the floor, and then they completely drop off. It's dark down there. So having lights in different areas to fill that space is huge. But then what I really noticed recently is backlighting, how important backlighting is to your video. Because when you backlight somebody, and I think we talked about this a couple shows ago, and I don't remember the exact show, maybe Stephen will remember, but we talked specifically about lighting and accent lighting. But for my church, we had the backlight go out. The board inside the light failed, and so we haven't been using it. And I'm just like, our video looks so flat now. And it's amazing how much depth that you can add to video when you get accent lights, when you get backlights, and then again, make sure all that lighting is even. So yeah, don't forget it. You can have the greatest video camera in the world, but if you're not lighting your scene correctly and adding that depth to the video, it's going to look flat, and it's not going to be as engaging to the audience. Yeah, so that's what I got there.
Right. No, and you know, you don't want to see shadows on people's faces, and you know, you want to be able to see them. So these are all good tips. Tip number 9, Stephen, we're talking about engagement with the camera itself. So let's talk a little bit about that and how you go about, you know, making sure that the pastor, the speaker, the presenter really does that.
Exactly, and I can even do a demonstration here where I see a lot of churches where pastors or speakers are not looking into the camera. They're forgetting about the folks online and they're just looking at the audience. And you guys right now, you're watching the show and you notice all 3 of us were looking into the camera as if we're talking directly to you. My question to you then how would it be if I was looking like this and I was talking directly to you, but it doesn't feel like I'm talking to you because I'm, one, not looking at the right camera, and I'm not looking directly at you. It's kind of like when you're having a conversation with somebody, you tend to look at them in the eye. One of the ways that you can circumvent this is getting yourself some tally lights. And tally lights are something I use in my studio. We also have them at the church, and it's something that is very, very important when it comes to production if you're using multiple cameras. And I highly recommend getting some form of tally light so that way the pastor, the speaker, the missionary, whoever you have that is teaching knows what camera is live. So they can look in the camera and say, yeah, I'm talking to you. And it doesn't feel impersonal. That's one of the big things that I think that a lot of churches or houses of worship don't do correctly, and their engagement, it doesn't spike because it feels so impersonal. You don't get that that family feeling. You don't get that like he's talking to me feeling. I don't know how else to explain it, but I think that there's something to that. Just like us sitting here looking at you guys, the audience. It really makes the connection that much better, Julia.
Yeah, and in all fairness, with the exception of the both of you, most pastors and preachers were not previously given training as far in video production or being on camera and things like that. So it really there is a bit of a learning curve. And you mentioned tally lights. So tally lights, for those who don't know, are lights that are indicator lights, so that you see them in broadcast settings a lot in news rooms, and so the talent knows exactly which camera to look at. So that's what tally lights are, and they're a really simple addition to just creating that easier workflow. So on that topic, to a certain degree, tip number 10: keeping your area clean and clear. Talking about clutter, things like that. Some of those things can be a little unsightly when they're in the view of the camera. Stephen?
No, I think this was Jeremy. Jeremy, you got this one.
Yeah, Jeremy. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're good. You're good.
So, so cleanliness is huge. The church I was on staff at we had a 5,000 square foot stage for our stage. So it was massive. It's bigger than most homes. And so keeping a stage of that size clean was next to impossible, because you had cables going everywhere. You had all sorts of stuff on there. And if you're a tech, video, musician, we know you love coffee a little way too much. And most likely you're going to leave your Starbucks coffee cup somewhere on stage. We would actually have people go through at some point and just clean up water bottles, clean up, coffee cups, keep trash handy next to your stage. So your musicians, anybody on stage that's there rehearsing and practicing and different things, they can throw their stuff away. But yeah, cables, keep it clean. Do neat cable runs. There's a church that I volunteer at frequently. Actually, it meets in my kids' school, and every time I walk in there on stage, I kind of do one of these, because there's rat's nests of cables everywhere, and we're like, okay, which mic are you using? And they'll have to trace the wire down. They get to a nest of cables, and we're like, oh, no, I have no clue what input that is. So keeping it clean isn't only for look, but it's also for the ease of your sound person or your video person working on the system, because then you're able to route cables and trace cables correctly. So cleanliness is it's a part of your presentation as well. So it speaks a lot about how you view ministry, how you engage with people. It's part of your image.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it can be very distracting too when you're supposed to be. You kind of tune out because you're like looking at some of the things in the background. I mean, we've even seen it to a certain degree in some of the things that we do in our video conferencing. So,
yep.
Oh, yeah, let's see. Lawrence has a comment here, and he says,
yeah, well, go ahead.
I was going to say, he says, what helps is camera placement. We put our PTZ camera at the bottom of the choir loft, which is in the center of the sanctuary. So looking at the audience is close to looking at the camera.
Yeah.
Referring to camera placement, I believe.
Yep.
So that's a good tip.
That's a great tip. Absolutely. Speaking of cameras, tip number 11 is, the idea of bringing in multiple cameras to really enhance your worship live stream. Many houses of worship, they're starting out, they're not looking to invest in multiple cameras. They just want to get started. But over time, this is something that, you're going to want to consider for sure. So, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of houses of worship, they jump right in and they feel like they have to get, all these whiz-bang graphics. They have to get all these cameras. They want 20 cameras deep, and they haven't really identified how to set anything up. And they just start placing cameras, and sometimes, as often as we see, they're not placed in correct positions, or they're not placed in positions where they can really be utilized. And so my suggestion always is to houses of worship starting out, spend the money on the computer that you need that's going to be doing the streaming. Get yourself a good quality camera, good quality audio, and start with that. Eventually, you are going to want to update and upgrade and go to multiple cameras. The reasoning for that is just like this. If we sat here on myself or Julia or even Jeremy the whole show, you guys would be like, okay, enough of this already. Let's at least, guys, do a 3-box here so we can look at all 3 of you at the same time. Same thing's true with sporting events. If you just sat there and watched the coach the whole football game, it's not a lot of fun. So adding production value to your house of worship service is key. I tend to recommend, if the folks have the budget, 4 I think is a good minimum if you're going to do a standard traditional 4-camera shoot for a house of worship. You can obviously go more than that. I think we use 6 of them right now, but we've added different shots like stage drum cameras. People always, especially if it's a faster upbeat song, they like to peer in on me, what I'm doing. So it's just an additional camera. Sometimes we have a camera shooting at the guitar player if he's doing a lead. It just helps with the engagement rather than just sitting and looking at a static shot the whole church service. So adding things like ProPresenter with slides, PowerPoint, doing a side-by-side shot, using something like OBS that's free, or graduating to vMix Wirecast or something along those lines, you have the ability to kind of spice it up. So don't think you have to do it right from the get-go. Julia, this is something that they can move forward with down the road. It's something that can be added to. It doesn't have to be done day one.
Yeah. No, that's great. We want to create what you would see in the church. I mean, our church, we have slide presentations as well, like at the end of the service sometimes, to talk about upcoming events and programs, and just having multiple cameras to create that interest is important. So there's another comment that's up on the screen there. How do you mitigate light glare from key lighting in a PTZ camera on stage that can see the stage and congregation?
Well, that's a great question. And typically, key lighting is way too often so broad, right? Because you're trying to wash like your whole stage. I go to a church frequently where they wash out their projection screens completely, and I'm just like, okay, get some barn doors for your lights. And so barn doors are a lighting technique that you can use where you actually frame in where that light's going to shine. So barn doors, like black wrap is a lighting director's best friend. Black wrap is essentially tin foil that's lighting grade, so it's heavier gauge, and it's like a matte black finish, so it's not going to glare and shine. But black wrap can be used to kind of shade your lights so they're not hitting specific things. And then getting your camera placement correct. So, if it's getting light glare, maybe raise it up a foot where it's not going to catch that light. So there's a lot of options there what you can do with that lighting.
100%. It's sometimes maybe you have to raise your lighting up as opposed to keeping it the same level. Like I have a key light, which you guys can't really see. Right here, it's off to my left. That light just basically shines a little bit to drop a shadow off of me because my ceiling is a little low on this side because of my HVAC. But I also have lights up top that act as a hair light here. And so I have lights in front. But if you position them just right, you don't get any glare off like the TV. Like Jeremy said, you can really do some things. You just got to finagle it and adjust the position. And Julia, if you get the position right, anything goes.
Absolutely. Anything goes. Well, tip number 12, monitor the stream. You can't just assume everything's working for the online stream. So Stephen or Jeremy, who wants to take this one?
Sure, I'll take it. So we have somebody in our church congregation, part of the leadership team, that actually monitors the stream. I, as kind of the production director, will have it up as well, kind of just eyes in the sky, see what's going on, make sure it's rolling off, it's playing, and it's playing correctly. But then also the volunteer is watching the stream, making sure that engagement is happening, and quite often they will let me know, hey, there's something wrong, or people are commenting that the audio is not working properly. So like, although I have it up, I'm not actively listening to the stream, which is something that you can do as well. But monitoring is hugely important, and honestly, monitor the whole thing. We've had so many, again, with Resi, the big part that we like to talk about is our reliability, and we're constantly talking about how we can overcome network issues. Well, there's been a lot of streaming services recently that we've heard of that will drop off in the middle of a stream, which is terrible for the viewer experience. But too many times we focus on getting it started, making sure it looks good when we're started, and then just forgetting about it. So watch the whole thing, have it up the whole time, make sure that it's going through, and that intermittently there's not problems that are happening. So that's just a couple plugs there.
There's a comment on the screen. We use one PTZ for close-up and changing points of interest. We also use 3 security cams, cheaper for long shots, all working great for us. That's great, Tom. That's awesome. So we talked a little about monitoring the stream. That's something you'd certainly have a volunteer do, even a teenager, somebody, just to make sure everything's going smoothly. And tip number 13, counting down, running a countdown. This is something that we do with this show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Stephen?
Yeah, I know this is a tough subject because there's a lot of people out there that really don't like the countdown, and then there's the other half that do like the countdown. And so I'm going to pose this out to you, and you guys decide if this is something that's going to be right for you. I personally like to do countdowns for my show. One, it lets the audience know that the video is moving, because sometimes if you're working in the background and you have an over-the-shoulder camera shot, they can't really see that you're moving, okay? The other thing is with a countdown, a lot of guys put royalty-free music playing while that's going on so that the audience member knows that there's audio coming through, and it's coming through loud and clear. And oftentimes, I know we do this with the church. We'll write in the chat room, "Hey, how does the audio sound? Is it too loud? Is it too soft?" And so that's a way that the sound engineer there can get the audio just right. There is the other side of it where people think it's a waste. It takes away from like, hey, I just want to get into this. And so you have to decide for yourself if it's right for you. We personally do a countdown timer. We run our announcements, and then we have the countdown in the corner, and there's usually some background music playing. So I think it's really, this is a preference thing. But I am a big fan of the countdown timer. Julia, as you mentioned here, we run it for the show, and that's mainly to let everybody, hey, it's live, your internet connection's working, you're getting this in full HD, we're ready to go.
Yeah, I like the countdown. Maybe a little biased, but I like the countdown.
Yeah.
So tip number 14, we sort of touched on this with our tip about engagement, but again, just because it's so important, look into the camera, right? We've got another comment there. We've always had an in-house countdown. We switched to that at 5 minutes to the beginning of the service. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ralph. So Jeremy, again, looking into the camera, have you, any final tips on that before we move on? Because we've already touched on this one.
Yeah, I'll just very briefly share something, because my you commented most pastors are not video experts or anything. My pastor happens to be a video expert. He is a broadcast engineer, and so it's always fun working with him, because he knows it, he understands it, but then that sometimes he forgets also, because he's so used to camera equipment and everything being around. But one thing that he shared with me is, like, when you're looking at the camera, when you're engaging, too often we're looking at the front lens because that's where the camera is for us. But he said what really brings it a step further is when you look into the camera and look at the back of the camera and kind of focus there. And so then, as you're actually speaking to people in the audience, your eyes, you can always tell where they're looking, when you're talking face to face. And so especially when you're engaging with the audience online, you want it to be as personal as possible. So look beyond the camera, just to the back of it, and it's like you're actually looking at the person then receiving the video. So I thought that was a really neat tip that he shared with me, and just going that one step further, not just looking at the camera, but looking into the homes and into where people are, so you're engaging with them a little bit more.
No, that's a great tip. Thank you. So we talked a little bit about, bringing on graphics and presentations and other things like that. So tip number 15, graphics are good, but too many could create an issue. Mm-hmm. Stephen?
Yeah, I'm of the camp, less is more. Okay, so if you notice, even on this show, and I'm gonna kind of go to our triple box here just to kind of show this a little bit. We have graphics going. We have a little bit of a motion lower third there. You can see the sparkle going across the bottom. It's very subtle. It's not something that's overwhelming. You see the fade going across the lower third. But if you notice in the background behind the 3 box, there's subtle motion to the video. It's not overwhelming. It's not going to give you an epileptic seizure. And I think a lot of times folks in houses of worship, it's kind of, and I use the example of a drummer that has to hit every drum, has to hit every cymbal on every song. There's finesse to it. And this is something, when it comes to video, less is sometimes more. If you take the traditional TV model, this is your typical traditional TV model. And I'm not saying graphics that are moving are bad, but you really need to take into consideration, like, if you were watching this as an audience member, is it going to distract you from the content that's going forward, no matter if it's a church service, a wedding service, whatever? Is it going to distract me? If the answer is yes, then you're probably putting too much speed on it, or you're putting too much graphics on the screen. We like to try to keep it simple here with this. And even at our home church, we keep things very simple with it. Just because you have it Julia, doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it.
Right. No, that makes sense. And you know, you don't want people to just be confused about where they should be focusing.
Correct.
And then at the end of the day, it's detracting from your overall message. So that makes a lot of sense. So tip number 16 kind of goes hand in hand with know your audience. Streaming worldwide. What would you say about that, Jeremy? When you know you're potentially reaching people in multiple countries.
Yeah, well, it's really cool. We've heard a lot of testimonies from churches that we serve at Resi where, you know, they have had church members join from out of state because again, you know, people are in a place where they haven't been in a long time, where they can watch different church services and really engage, you know, where they haven't necessarily felt like they've been able to in the past. So, it's huge. Like we have a church, we have a couple members of our church that know a lot of people in the Middle East, but we're kind of in a melting pot area, anyways. In DC, it's a huge multicultural area. So we know people. We have ties to people all over the world. So we actually have a little house church that started where they watch our service together in a Middle Eastern country. So, so you think about that, and again, if you have a lot of that, start to consider. Oh, number one, it brings up a good point, and I don't remember if this topic was on there, but view your analytics constantly. Where are people watching from? And depending on what platform you're using, there's really good deep analytics of where people are watching, how long people are engaging in those areas. So view them and review them constantly. But then do multi-language streams. If you find that you are having a lot of people watching from different countries, and there are countries that speak a different language, consider having an interpreter feed audio into that web stream, and then do a multi-channel or multi-language stream where they have different pages that they can go to. Some of our premier customers that we serve for Resi, I think there's one church that's doing 12 different languages. And so they have 12 different interpretations going into their video encoder, and then they have one dedicated for each region that they reach out to.
Wow, that's amazing. How about the frequency of camera changes? We had quite a few complaining about that, which surprised me. Thank you, Ralph, again. Have you guys ever experienced that? That's an interesting comment.
I personally haven't experienced somebody complaining about it, but I tell the youth kids that do this, and as well as the volunteers, and Jeremy, you know, feel free to jump in on this, but I usually tell them 3 to 5 seconds is usually the typical switching, unless the pastor's you know relating to a scripture and you have it up in a side-by-side box, you know, he's pointing to it. People want to see that, but if you're switching angles of the pastor, 3 to 5 seconds is usually my go-to.
Well, and I was going to kind of possibly do a wrap up at the end, but we've talked about a lot of these things, and the biggest answer I say is be intentional with it, because there's no reason to necessarily have a camera angle change if there's nothing changing. You know, to a degree, you can do camera changes to keep people's engagement and like, oh, something changed, and do that. But yet at the same time, if there's nothing changing in the scene, what's the purpose of changing a camera angle? Right. So there's a couple ways to look at it, and ultimately, you know, with graphics we talked about, with camera angle changes, with lighting even, be intentional. What's the purpose of this? What am I trying to do with this camera change? And if there's no reason to do it, then why do it? So there's kind of a balance there, because yes, you want to keep people engaged, but yet at the same time, like Lawrence was saying, people got distracted because it's too much. Well, then it's not purposeful. So that's a big part of it too, is be intentional with the tools that you're using.
Right. And that sort of goes back to the be real, doesn't it? If you're
Yep.
just doing it if you're doing it for flash, then it really doesn't serve the purpose. So,
Yep, exactly.
Tip number 17, private. Some things can be private. They don't have to be live streamed. So, what would you say about that, Stephen?
So a lot of people are private people. I mean, we do baptisms, we do baby dedications, we do funerals, weddings, and sometimes people ask us to stream them, and sometimes people ask that we don't stream it because they want it to be a private moment. It's okay to offer that to the congregation. What I tend to do is, if I know baptism's coming up, or I know that there's a funeral or baby dedication, I go up to that family ahead of time, or our gentleman that is my successor, if you will. He goes up and he'll ask him. I've taught him to go up and ask him, say, hey, do you want this streamed online? If they say no, we don't really want it because we just rather keep it private, but we would like it recorded. Make that an option. It doesn't always, it's not live streamed or nothing. You have to give them that opportunity. I think it's fair to do that. And there's some folks, I've had people say, well, we want this funeral streamed because Aunt Nellie that's in North Dakota can't watch this unless you live stream it. We're okay with that. So those are some things, Julia, that everybody should keep in mind when live streaming, that you don't necessarily have to do everything. It's always be mindful to talk to other congregants if they're involved in it.
That's important, almost along the lines of model releases and things like that, because some people really choose to not be on Facebook and to have social media of any kind for a number of reasons.
Correct.
So I think that's really important.
And with facial recognition being so prominent now, it's huge, and you almost have to be mindful of that with the people in the congregation as well. At least we do at our church, because like I said, with DC being such a diverse area, we actually have a couple people who asked us very specifically, hey, I don't ever want to be on camera. I don't ever want to, I don't want my picture posted anywhere because of where our video and Facebook and everything reaches out to. And they just have that preference of, hey, I don't want my content out there to let people know where I am. So I thought, so it's not only the live stream side, but know who's in your audience. I've done video for a lot of large conferences of big name speakers, and they have signs at the door saying this service will be broadcast. Please see an usher if for any reason your video or you cannot be on video. And so you have to be mindful of people in the audience if you're doing audience camera shots. So I thought that was, that's something that isn't always talked about or thought about with privacy, but it's a good point also.
Well, being that you're in the DC area, you've got me intrigued now, Jeremy. I'm wondering, do you have any CIA operatives in your in your congregation? You never know, right? You just never know who your neighbor is. So.
Exactly.
Tip number 18, we certainly alluded to this, and somebody whose comment we showed, I don't know if it was Ralph's, but camera position. Where's the best place, and what do you really want to get in that shot for your main camera, at any rate, Stephen?
Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So my big thing with camera positions, and when we talked about multi-cameras earlier, I think at my previous church we had 8 cameras, and they've expanded it since then. Obviously, we wouldn't use all 8 for Sunday morning service. More of those were special events. But like, if you have a multi-camera setup, you want to be strategic. So like our camera 2 shot was, just a head chest up shot, and then we had a head to toe shot. So each of those, you want the camera to be kind of centered at what you're framing. in an instance. So our camera 2 shot was a little bit higher than our camera 3 shot that was a head to toe. So you want the ability to have different levels of cameras and then angles. So we would have 2 cameras that were literally right next to each other. One was the tight shot, one was the head to toe, and then we had an audience camera that was actually a 30-foot boom, jib boom, so it could get the whole audience. It could also get low and shoot across and audience shots. So depending on exactly what you're doing with your service, there's different ways to look at it. And then typically, and I would say of the cameras and what you're wanting to do with your service, the center camera and probably a stage camera getting instruments is going to be your highest priority. You don't, if you're doing a worship set, you want that intimate feel of like, different instruments playing, like the piano or guitar or whatever. But again, there you're looking at so many different styles of worship sets. So be intentional with your camera positions. What are you trying to get? But make sure it's not distracting, like we talked about earlier as well.
Yeah. I love this comment from Pastor Warren. Good point on privacy. A friend of mine has a son that is in the Special Forces. He cannot have his face on any social media at all.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
We thank him for his service. That is that's incredible. And then we have a comment here. I usually set mine at the far back in front of the speaker, then zoom in.
Yep.
So again, capturing that head and shoulders view of the speaker, the presenter, for the most engagement. Well, we're winding down here, but I do have 2 more tips. Tip number 19, this maybe seems pretty basic, but provide service information. Make sure to let anyone know who's watching where they can subscribe to your services in case they can't watch live. Is this often overlooked?
That's your call to action. I think, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but listen, I always say, if you don't promote yourself, nobody else is going to, right? So you want to get the word out about your church, where to find it. If you have a podcast, I know what we do. We don't really burn things to CDs anymore. We either give out a thumb drive, if for those that really need a physical copy, but we make it available on all your podcasting platforms, whether it's iTunes, Google Play, Roku. We have a Roku channel. So a lot of the folks now, because smart TVs and Rokus are pretty much built into anything and everything, most people watch it online. So we don't really do CDs anymore. Jeremy's shaking his head, yeah, because that's the reality where we're at right now. So
you don't do tapes anymore, Steve?
we don't do tapes anymore, and this is something that you got to tell people where to find it, especially if they're new people, because the old way of doing it is, as Jeremy said, tapes. You hand out tapes, and we haven't done CDs probably in, I'd say, 5 or 6 years. So,
yeah,
Julia, got to tell people where to find it.
And it's hilarious. Real quick, I'm on different churches' websites all the time. It's amazing to me how many churches don't have their physical meeting location address there available, and I'm just like, where am I going to go? How am I going to?
You need an address.
Yeah, some of those details they're really basic, but it's easy to forget when you're working on all these other aspects of creating an online service. So finally, tip number 20, listen. Don't be afraid to listen to your volunteers. I know you guys have been in both capacities as volunteer and on staff. So, whoever wants to take us home with this last one, Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny because I was just sharing this with somebody recently, and we had a volunteer, and the cameras that we use were manned cameras. And we always had kind of like a huddle time before service would start to see how everybody's doing. And he let us know that he wasn't feeling the greatest, but we didn't dive into that any and listen to like, hey, what's going on? And he ended up passing out in the middle of service. Well, like when you pass out, so with our cameras, we'd have them up on a platform so it was probably 3 foot off the ground to start with. When you pass out, you're grabbing for the closest thing to you. He happened to grab the tripod and pulled that tripod over and fell 3 feet and pulled the camera over on top of him.
Oh man.
And it was terrible. Praise the Lord that he wasn't hurt more than he actually was. But when you always have to listen to the needs of what's going on with your volunteers. And a big thing to listen for is burnout. What are you using them too much? Are they complaining about the job that they have there for the church? And listen for that too. A lot of times in the technical world, we find somebody who's excited about technology and we're like, hey, we're going to use you, and then you use them too frequently. So listen for things like that. But your volunteers are the ones doing it. So if they have some good advice, be humble, be willing to listen and hear them out, because they will come up with some great ideas.
Yeah, and Ralph, you showed a great comment from Ralph, about praising your volunteers. It's so important. Randall says we've also stopped naming our missionaries in China so they won't get arrested. Oh my gosh, that's important. Also, we are careful to not name when people are traveling. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You don't want anyone to potentially have a break-in related to that. And like any information sharing online, and there's all kinds of tips for that out there. You want to follow some of those same practices. Well, this was a robust conversation. As always, I enjoy joining you both, Stephen and Jeremy, the 20 worship tips. And if anyone is looking to get this list that we created, if they want it in print, feel free to email salttalk@PTZOptics.com, and we can send that over to you. And if you're interested in any particular equipment for your house of worship, email partners@PTZOptics.com.
And Julia, one other thing, the other show, the 4th of November.
That's right. We have a live stream at 2 o'clock on Thursday, November the 4th, 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we will be diving into House of Worship copyright issues for music. So, we're kind of going to be continuing part of this conversation next week. And all November, we are focusing on houses of worship with the upcoming holiday season being right around the corner, believe it or not. It seems like it was just summer, didn't it? So thank you. Thank you both. Again, you can watch Salt Talk the last Tuesday of each month at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and feel free to continue to send us your questions, salttalk@PTZOptics.com. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great week.